everyone, and welcome to Lunch Hour Lessons with Allison. I'm Allison Mädl, and today is November 7th, 2018. Every Wednesday at 12:30, I come to you live to introduce a topic that I think is interesting and give you a lesson to take with you into your daily life. If you have any questions or like what you hear during the show, be sure to comment or like this video. Right after the broadcast, I'll be posting a detailed outline of the topic at my blog at allisonmadel.com. This week's topic is the concept of added sugar. So welcome, everybody. I wanted to talk about sugar first because people are really becoming aware now of how sugar is maybe not as benign as it's been seen in the past. It's kind of taken the place of fat in regards to kind of what the hot topic of discussion is these days about what's good or bad for our health. And so I wanted to talk about added sugar. And there's a difference between added sugar and natural sugars. So added sugar is defined as any sugar that's added to food or beverage in the processing or cooking. So you can be the person to add the sugar, or the manufacturer who makes the product that you're eating can be the one to add the sugar. So for example, if you're making banana bread, the added sugar is the sugar, honey, molasses, maple syrup, whatever sweetener that you're using that you include to make the bread sweeter. The natural sugars that are present in the bananas themselves don't count as added sugars, even if they are pretty sweet. So we know with banana bread, we tend to let those bananas get really spotty and brown, and that's what makes them the sweetest, because actually they've converted most of the sugars in themselves to the usable sugars that we can taste, and broken those fibers down. So they're, at that time, we either say, oh, it's time to make banana bread, or we throw them away. And so, but even as sweet as those bananas would be, a lot of people would add sugar to their banana bread recipe, and that's what the added sugars are. So there's nothing wrong with making homemade banana bread at home, even with sugar once in a while. But the problem arises when a large percentage of the food that a person eats is actually made by others in restaurants or as a food product. So this is kind of where the concept of outsourcing our food intake comes from, to have other people make it. And unfortunately, the thing that's often added to all these restaurant foods and processed foods is sugar, in many different forms and in many different names. So most of the time, the foods that are in restaurants, products that are marketed to adults, and products served to children in school lunches, unfortunately, have a really high added sugar content. Americans are kind of notorious for our preference for sweet foods, which is like a feedback loop, because we prefer sweets, and then the manufacturers know we like sugar, and so they often put more in, and that causes us to like it more, and so more is added, and then our taste basically goes up and up in terms of how much sugar we desire in a food. Sometimes if we taste a food that doesn't have the amount of sugar that we're kind of used to tasting, it can seem kind of off or bland. So let's talk about how much sugar, in terms of added sugar, we're really kind of the upper limits of what we would want to be having in a day. So the American Heart Association recommends no more than 24 to 36 grams of added sugar per day for adults. So not per meal, but per day. So that would be, the upper limit would be 36 grams of added sugar per day for adults. And for children, it's much lower. It's actually no more than 12 grams of sugar per child per day. So it's really important to read nutrition labels and look for the grams of sugar that are on there. Some labels will have a new section that actually says added sugar. And that's great, because then you can be paying attention to how much that is, adding it up, and making sure that you or your kids aren't eating too much of that added sugar. Because again, the 36 grams for adults is the added sugar content, not the natural sugar content. And we'll talk a little bit in a couple weeks coming about kind of how the natural sugar content plays into it. So in terms of ingredients, the added sugars can come in many different names. So you really have to do some investigating. And if you Google different names for sugar, you'll find a lot of information, and some of it may really surprise you. There's sugar alcohols, there's sugar artificial sweeteners, there's sugar stevia and extracts, and all sorts of different ways that people can add a sweet taste to foods. So it's a good idea to get educated about these names so that you can be a better ingredient label reader. I never read ingredient labels until I started thinking more about the foods that I was eating. And I always just looked at that nutrition facts box and looked at the calories, the fats, the protein, maybe the carbohydrates, but mostly fat. That's kind of what we were in the past conditioned to be careful of. I still remember 60 grams a day was all that I was allowed to eat. And in high school, I'd track my fat intake, but of course I wasn't consuming very many good healthy foods. I was mostly looking at processed food labels. So I've come a long way. So I do encourage you to do what I've been practicing now and just skip that nutrition facts box altogether and look straight to the ingredient list first. That would be a really good step to do. And sometimes that ingredient list can be kind of hard to find. It is buried under a flap of a product package, or it's, in tiny letters on the side, so you have to kind of look for it. So why do we even care about added sugar at all? I talked about how it's now on the topic of debate for some people as to whether it's healthy or not. And the main problem with added sugar is that it's an inflammatory substance. So what that does as an inflammatory substance is when it goes into our bodies and gets digested into our bloodstream, it irritates the lining of our arteries. It can make our joints hurt. So it actually causes inflammation in the joints. It can lower our immune response so that we get sick more often. And frustratingly, it can even make us crave more sugar. So this in itself can be painful, having to sort of, put that willpower up all the time. And it can lead to weight gain because eventually the sugar can't even be used as energy and just gets stored and stored and stored in fat tissue. So that's all the time we have for today. Be sure to tell a friend this week's lunch hour lesson, which is consuming the least amount of added sugar possible is one of the best things that you can do for your health. Again, consuming the least amount of added sugar possible is one of the best things you can do for your health. Like my page to get the weekend tip that goes with this lesson on Friday at 5 p.m. And also let me know what future topic you'd like me to discuss. I'll see you next week. Bye for now.